So, how can we train the sit command most effectively? There are a number of different ways of training the sit command, but at Love Canine we like to use the lure system, positive reinforcement system. So the first thing to maybe talk about quickly is what kind of lure might be appropriate for training the sit command. A lure is just something that you're going to use to keep your dog's attention during a training activity. So a treat lure could be something like sausage, chicken, piece of ham, or it could be a non-food lure, something like a tennis ball or a squeaky toy or another favourite toy that your dog has at home. You know what's best for your dog and what your dog is going to really pay attention to when you're training the sit command, so you choose what lure is best for you and your dog. The idea, of course, is that you use a good lure alongside a good visual cue and a good verbal cue. Now, your verbal cue is just the sit command, what you're going to say to your dog when you want them to sit, and your visual cue is just the hand signal. The hand signal from straight on looks a bit like this from your dog's perspective, or sideways on might look a little bit like this. And all you're doing is you're holding the lure and you're pushing the lure over the dog's muzzle between their eyes, almost combing their forehead with the back of your hand. Now, the sit command provides a number of different benefits. So if your dog, for example, is going to do any working trials, so obedience work maybe, or maybe you've got a pastoral breed like a working collie, or maybe you've got a gun dog, you get the idea. Any particular work you're going to do with your dog in the future, the sit command is a key requirement. The second benefit of the sit command, of course, is that it's an excellent control tool. So you might want to use it maybe as you're leaving the home. Maybe you might want to ask your dog to sit before they get into the car. Maybe when you meet an elderly person in the street, it would be an ideal situation to ask your dog to sit. So it's a brilliant control tool and one definitely to harness as soon as you can. The third benefit that we should be aware of is that training something like the sit command, it breeds responsiveness for the future. So if you're training the sit command and your dog is listening to you, getting some nice feedback, maybe a treat or a cuddle from you once they've done the sit, and they get good at the sit over time, it just means in the future when you're training a more complex command or set of commands, your dog will already be on side. So don't lose sight of the fact that training the sit command in its own right will pay dividends later on when you're training maybe a set of commands that are a little bit more complex. Very worthwhile. You're going to see a couple of videos in a second or two which will demonstrate the visual hand signal, the visual cue from your dog's point of view, and the visual cue and the verbal cue happen at the very same time. So it's very important that that your command looks and sounds like this. Sit. And sit. Good, and yay, good boy. Yay. Sit. Good girl. Nice. One brilliant strategy when you're training any new command, including the sit command, would be to hone in on the 3 great times in your dog's day. So when they're playing is a great time, when they're feeding is a great time, and when they're out for a walk, that's a great time. So just before these times, what I would recommend is that you ask them to sit. Then the sit will be the beginning of the pattern of them going out for a walk. The sit will begin the pattern of them feeding. The sit will begin the pattern of them having some playtime with you. You're getting the idea. So what you're doing is you're trying to make a wonderful association in their mind. If you ask them to sit, something good is around the corner. All they've got to do is put their bottom on the floor and something good will happen. When training the sit behaviour, it's very important that we're all aware of the following key points. The first point is to be aware of yourself. You're the teacher, so be careful of the colour of your mind. Make sure that it stays green and don't allow frustration to creep into the mix. Be a good and green teacher is the message. It's very important as well, as a good teacher, to select your teaching environment appropriately. Don't take a young puppy, for example, to the park and start training them to sit when there's loads of distractions around them. Train the puppy or younger dog in your back garden, in your kitchen, in your lounge, and then progress to the park. So do things gradually, I think, is the key message, and be careful that you select your teaching environment appropriately. Don't overwhelm your dog with lots of stimulus and expect them to be focused on you, particularly if they're very young or maybe inexperienced dogs. Another very important point is not to overuse the sit. Don't ask your dog to sit at every turn, particularly if you've got a busy household or maybe lots of people visiting the home. Sit seems to be in there every time someone speaks to the dog. So don't overuse the sit, otherwise what happens is the dog will begin to maybe tune out the command every now and again, and that's not a really productive way forward. Another point is to try and guard against the sit becoming a punitive measure. So maybe they've eaten something in the garden and you're not too impressed with that. A lot of people will say, "Come here, Rufus, sit." And really it isn't the right association from the dog's perspective. So try and use it in a productive manner and less in a punitive setting. Avoid as much as possible pushing your dog down into the sit. The problem with that is, one, that you're putting pressure on your dog, physical pressure, pushing them down, so that really gives a negative association with the whole sit concept, so avoid that. And also the other problem with pushing your dog down into the sit is in the future when they're off lead and in the distance, and if you were to ask them to sit, well, they're thinking, you're not near me, you can't push me down into the sit, so the likelihood is they may not sit. Try and condition them using your good visual cue and your strong verbal cue, and try and achieve success in that manner, of course praising heartily at every turn. Also, be aware of how you're treating the behaviour. In other words, if you're using a high value food lure, something like a piece of liver cake or chicken or cheese, definitely use that kind of lure in the very beginning. So when you ask your dog to sit in the beginning and your dog pops his bottom on the floor, definitely release the treat immediately, making a great association. After a while, however, you need to maybe vary the treat type, so vary it going away from food, maybe use a squeaky toy or a tennis ball, or maybe ask for a sit behaviour just before you take your dog out for a walk, and make a different association in their mind that they don't always get a food treat for doing the sit behaviour. And one final point would be, if you have a long dog, so if you have a running dog, something like an Italian Greyhound, a Lurcher, a Whippet, a dog built for speed, then they're often not very given to the whole sitting thing. They will sit, but they tend to not want to remain in the sitting position for any period of time. I think that's primarily because of how they're built. So be a little bit more patient with them, and I advise maybe asking for a wait rather than a sit on occasions. So the summary points are, one, the trainer, that's you. You need to have a very good and fair state of mind, because you're the teacher, remember, so you want to give off that very good and positive vibe to your trainee. That's the first point. The second point is, consider maybe joining a training group that will help school your dog to listen to the sit behaviour in the company of other dogs, in the company of other people, in a strange environment. So that's all very good news. And the other thing to do would be consistent. Have a consistent visual cue, a consistent verbal cue that happen at the same time, remember. Vary the treat system that you have so your dog doesn't become too expectant on food treats, and really practice before you feed, before you walk, before you play, and be just a very positive trainer throughout. Oh, before you go, we have a book online. It's on Amazon, so check us out and maybe look inside the book when you go on Amazon, and hopefully that might prove of interest. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to catching up very soon. Thanks so much.